I am Sarah Mitchell, 28 years old, and last Thursday evening changed everything I thought I knew about my place in this family. I was standing in the hallway of my childhood home, having just arrived for what I thought was a casual family dinner, when I heard my mother's voice drifting from the living room. Her words stopped me cold in my tracks. "She's not pretty enough for our family photos," she whispered to my sister Emma. "We can't have her ruining the Christmas card again this year." The shopping bags I was carrying slipped from my hands, groceries scattering across the hardwood floor as the weight of those words settled into my chest like a physical blow. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 28 years of feeling like I never quite measured up suddenly crystallized into one devastating moment of clarity. But what I did next would shock even me, and the results were beyond anything I could have imagined. To understand how my mother's whispered confession that evening would become the catalyst for the most transformative period of my life, you need to know the history that led us to that moment. Growing up as the middle child in the Mitchell family meant existing in a constant state of comparison, though I didn't fully realize it until much later. My older sister Emma had always been the golden child, blessed with what my mother called classic beauty, tall blonde, with the kind of effortless elegance that made people turn their heads when she walked into a room. My younger brother Jake inherited my father's strong jawline and athletic build, becoming the star quarterback in high school and later earning a full scholarship to Duke University. Then there was me. Average height, brown hair that never seemed to hold a style for more than an hour, and what my mother diplomatically called a pleasant face. I wasn't ugly, but I wasn't stunning either. I was painfully unremarkably ordinary in a family that seemed to collect beauty and achievement like other families collected refrigerator magnets. The family photos that lined our hallways told a story I had never consciously acknowledged but had always felt in my bones. Emma posed confidently in the center, Jake's athletic frame commanding attention, my parents looking proud and distinguished, and there I was, usually positioned slightly behind someone else or at the edge of the frame, as if whoever was taking the photo had tried to minimize my presence without making it obvious. My mother, Patricia Mitchell, had been a beauty queen in her youth. Miss Tennessee runner-up in 1985, she never let anyone forget it. The tiara still sat in a place of honor on her dresser, and yellowed newspaper clippings of her pageant days decorated her walk-in closet like shrines to a glorious past. She had married my father David, partly because he was handsome enough to complement her beauty and successful enough to maintain the lifestyle she felt she deserved. Together they created what appeared to be the perfect family, at least from the outside. The signs of my mother's obsession with appearances had been there throughout my childhood, though I had learned to normalize behavior that, looking back, was anything but normal. When I was 7 years old and lost my 2 front teeth just days before school pictures, my mother refused to let me smile with my mouth open. "We can't have those school photos looking like a jack-o'-lantern," she said, positioning my lips in a tight closed-mouth expression that made me look miserable in every single picture that year. While other children's gap-toothed grins were celebrated as adorable milestones, mine was treated as an embarrassment to be hidden. The pattern continued as I grew older. When I developed acne during my freshman year of high school, my mother took me to 3 different dermatologists, not out of concern for my self-esteem or comfort, but because she was horrified at the thought of blemished skin appearing in our annual Christmas portrait. The appointments themselves weren't unusual. Many parents help their teenagers with skin problems, but the way she spoke about my face as if it were a defective product that needed fixing left scars deeper than any pimple ever could. High school brought new challenges to my mother's pursuit of family perfection. While Emma glided through her teenage years with homecoming crowns and modeling opportunities with local photographers, I struggled to find my place. I joined the debate team, where my quick wit and analytical mind made me a formidable competitor, but intellectual achievements didn't photograph well for Christmas cards. I volunteered at the animal shelter, finding solace in the unconditional love of abandoned dogs and cats, but compassion wasn't a trait that translated to family portraits. The worst incident happened during my junior year, when our family was invited to participate in a local magazine feature about successful families in our community. The photographer spent an entire afternoon at our house, taking dozens of shots in various configurations. I remember feeling genuinely excited to be part of something that celebrated our family's achievements. My father's architecture firm had just won a prestigious award. Emma had been accepted to Northwestern University with a partial academic scholarship, and Jake was being recruited by several college football programs. Even I had something to contribute. I had just been named captain of the debate team and had earned a perfect score on my SATs. When the magazine came out 2 months later, I eagerly flipped to the feature article, expecting to see our family prominently displayed. The main photo showed my parents, Emma and Jake, posed elegantly in our living room, looking like something out of a high-end furniture catalog. I appeared in only one smaller photo, barely visible in the background of a shot that focused on my father's architectural awards displayed on the bookshelf. The caption mentioned Emma's academic achievements and Jake's athletic prowess, but didn't reference my debate team captaincy or test scores at all. When I asked my mother about why I was barely featured, she gave me a look that I can still recall with perfect clarity. "Honey, the photographer had to work with what he had," she said, her tone suggesting that what he had to work with, when it came to me, was limited. Besides, these magazines prefer a certain look for their family features. That phrase, "a certain look," became a recurring theme in my mother's explanations for why I was increasingly absent from family photos, holiday cards, and social media posts. The exclusion wasn't always complete, which somehow made it worse. I would be included in large group shots where my presence could be diminished, positioned behind taller family members, or at angles that minimized my visibility. During family vacations, I noticed that my mother would take dozens of photos of Emma and Jake in various scenic locations, but photos of me were limited to group shots where I was just one face among many. When relatives asked why they didn't see more recent photos of me, my mother would laugh and say I was camera shy or going through an awkward phase, phrases that somehow made my absence seem like my own choice, rather than her deliberate decision. College provided a temporary escape from the constant assessment and judgment that defined my home life. At the University of Georgia, I discovered that intelligence, kindness, and humor were valued in ways they never had been in my family. I made genuine friendships with people who appreciated my quick wit and dry sense of humor. I joined the environmental club and helped organize campus sustainability initiatives. I even had a boyfriend, Marcus, who told me I was beautiful and seemed to mean it genuinely. For 4 years, I lived in a world where my worth wasn't determined by how I looked in photographs, or whether my presence enhanced or detracted from my family's image. I studied environmental science with a passion that surprised even me, graduating magna cum laude and earning acceptance to graduate programs at several prestigious universities. But even these achievements felt diminished when I returned home for holidays and special occasions. During my college graduation, my family attended the ceremony and took the obligatory photos afterward. I felt proud wearing my cap and gown, holding my diploma, surrounded by the people who had shaped my life. But when I saw the photos my mother posted on social media later that week, I noticed she had chosen the ones where I was partially obscured by shadows, or where the focus was soft enough to blur my features. The caption read, "So proud of our graduate," but somehow managed to emphasize Emma's recent promotion at her marketing firm, and Jake's upcoming NFL Combine invitation, more than my academic achievement. After graduation, I accepted a position with an environmental consulting firm in Atlanta, far enough from home to establish my independence, but close enough to maintain family connections. The work was fulfilling, involving everything from wetland restoration projects to helping corporations develop sustainable practices. My colleagues respected my expertise, and I quickly established myself as someone who could solve complex environmental problems with creative solutions. My personal life flourished as well. I bought a small house in a charming neighborhood, adopted 2 rescue dogs named Pepper and Salt, and cultivated a garden that became my sanctuary. I dated occasionally, though nothing serious developed after Marcus and I amicably ended our relationship when he moved to California for a job opportunity. I was content with my life, perhaps for the first time ever, building an identity completely separate from my family's expectations and judgments. But family holidays and special occasions remained minefields of emotional manipulation, disguised as love and concern. Every Christmas, Easter, and birthday gathering reinforced the same dynamics that had shaped my childhood. Emma would arrive looking effortlessly elegant, her latest accomplishments discussed at length over dinner. Jake, now playing for a semi-professional football team, while finishing his master's degree, commanded attention with stories of his athletic achievements and romantic conquests. And I would sit at the same dinner table, listening to polite inquiries about my work that lasted exactly long enough to be courteous before the conversation inevitably shifted back to my siblings' more photogenic lives. The annual Christmas card tradition was perhaps the most painful reminder of my place in the family hierarchy. Each year, my mother would organize elaborate photo sessions, hiring professional photographers and coordinating outfits that she claimed would create timeless family memories. The sessions themselves were exercises in careful positioning and selective inclusion. I would be present for some shots, absent from others, with my mother making decisions about my participation based on factors she never explicitly stated, but that I understood with growing clarity. Last year's Christmas card featured a beautiful portrait of my parents, Emma and Jake, posed in front of the fireplace in our family home. I had been present for the photo session, but appeared only in a smaller secondary photo on the back of the card, positioned behind a Christmas tree, where only part of my face was visible. When friends and colleagues asked why I wasn't in the main family photo, I had learned to make jokes about being the mysterious Mitchell, or claim that I had arrived late to the photo session, explanations that protected my family's image, while absolving me of having to admit the truth. I was only beginning to understand myself. The pattern extended beyond photographs, to family social media presence and public appearances. My mother's Instagram account, which had thousands of followers who admired her perfect family life, featured regular posts about Emma's career achievements and Jake's athletic success. Photos of family dinners, holiday celebrations, and casual moments invariably focused on my siblings, while I remained conspicuously absent or relegated to the background. When I did appear, it was usually in group shots where my presence was diluted among other people, or in photos where lighting or angles minimized my visibility. This careful curation of our family's public image extended to social events as well. When my parents hosted dinner parties or attended community functions, they would speak glowingly about Emma's promotion to marketing director and Jake's prospects for professional football, but my environmental work was mentioned only briefly, if at all. It wasn't that they were ashamed of my career exactly, but rather that it didn't fit the narrative they preferred to present about their family's success and attractiveness. The emotional toll of these dynamics accumulated gradually, like water slowly filling a vessel, until it finally overflows. I began to notice that I felt anxious before family gatherings, unconsciously bracing myself for the subtle but persistent message that I was somehow less worthy of attention, celebration, or inclusion than my siblings. I started declining invitations to extended family events, claiming work obligations or other commitments to avoid the familiar pattern of feeling invisible in my own family. Friends and colleagues occasionally commented on my reluctance to discuss my family or share family photos, but I had become skilled at deflecting these observations with humor or changing the subject. It was easier to maintain the fiction that we were a close, loving family than to acknowledge the complicated truth about my place within it. Besides, how do you explain to someone that your mother doesn't think you're attractive enough to be fully included in family photos, without sounding petty or self-pitying? The turning point began 3 months ago, when Emma announced her engagement to Christopher, a successful lawyer she had been dating for 2 years. The engagement party was scheduled for November, with plans for an elaborate wedding the following spring. My mother immediately launched into planning mode, treating Emma's engagement as if it were a royal wedding, requiring months of preparation and coordination. The engagement party itself was a lavish affair held at the country club, where my parents were longtime members. Emma looked radiant in a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, surrounded by friends and family who celebrated her happiness with genuine warmth. I was genuinely happy for my sister. Christopher was a good man who clearly adored her, and she deserved the fairy tale romance she had always dreamed of. But even during this celebration of Emma's happiness, I couldn't help but notice the familiar patterns playing out. The professional photographer my mother had hired spent the evening capturing every moment of Emma's joy, but the photos that included me were limited to large group shots, where I was positioned on the periphery. When Emma opened her engagement gifts, I watched from the edge of the crowd as the photographer documented her reactions, carefully framing shots that focused on the happy couple and our beaming parents, while somehow managing to exclude me from most of the intimate family moments. The engagement party photos appeared on my mother's social media accounts within days, each one carefully curated to present the perfect image of our family's celebration. Emma glowed in every shot, her beauty enhanced by professional lighting and expert composition. Jake looked handsome and proud in his role as protective brother, while my parents appeared distinguished and elegant as they welcomed Christopher into the family. I appeared in exactly 3 photos out of the dozens that were posted, always in the background, always slightly out of focus, always positioned in a way that made my presence feel incidental, rather than integral to the family celebration. The wedding planning process that followed was even more revealing. My mother threw herself into organizing what she called the wedding of the century, coordinating every detail, from the flowers to the photographer, to the guest list, with military precision. Emma, to her credit, tried to include me in the planning process, asking for my opinions on everything from centerpieces to menu selections. But it quickly became clear that my mother had very specific ideas about how the wedding should look and who should be prominently featured in the photos that would commemorate the occasion. During one particularly telling conversation about the wedding party arrangements, my mother suggested that I might be more comfortable serving as a coordinator rather than participating as a bridesmaid. "You know how you feel about being in photos, sweetie," she said with false sympathy. "This way you can help ensure everything runs smoothly, without worrying about all those cameras." The implication was clear: my presence in the wedding photos would somehow detract from the beauty and elegance she wanted to achieve, so it would be better for everyone if I remained behind the scenes. Emma, bless her heart, protested this suggestion and insisted that I be included as a bridesmaid. But even her advocacy felt complicated. Was she defending my inclusion because she genuinely wanted me there, or because she recognized how hurtful my exclusion would be? The uncertainty made even her kindness feel tainted by the possibility that it was motivated more by guilt than genuine desire for my participation. The bridesmaid dress shopping experience provided another painful reminder of my place in the family aesthetic. While Emma and my mother exclaimed over how beautiful the other bridesmaids looked in their chosen dresses, their reactions to my appearance were notably more subdued. "That color is nice on you," my mother would say with forced enthusiasm, or "the fit is fine," delivered in a tone that suggested settling for adequacy rather than celebrating beauty. The differences in treatment became even more apparent during the professional engagement photo session that Emma and Christopher scheduled for October. My mother insisted that the session include family photos that could be used for wedding announcements and save-the-date cards. I was included in some of the group shots, but I noticed that the photographer seemed to receive subtle direction about positioning and composition that consistently placed me in less prominent positions. When the engagement photos were delivered several weeks later, the pattern was unmistakable.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The photos featuring just Emma and Christopher were stunning, capturing their love and happiness with artistic beauty. The family photos told a different story. Emma and Christopher were centered and perfectly lit. My parents flanked them with pride and elegance. Jake stood tall and handsome beside his sister, and I was positioned in ways that minimized my visual impact on the overall composition. The photo that would eventually be used for the wedding announcement was particularly telling. It showed Emma and Christopher gazing lovingly at each other in the center, surrounded by family members arranged in a careful composition that looked both natural and artistically pleasing. I was included, but positioned behind and slightly to the side of my father in a way that made me barely visible unless you looked carefully. When the announcement appeared in the local newspaper and on social media, casual observers might not even notice that Emma had a sister. These experiences accumulated like small cuts that never quite heal, each one individually minor but collectively creating a wound that grew deeper with every family gathering, every photo session, every social media post that subtly reinforced my position as the family member who was included but never truly featured. I began to realize that what I had always interpreted as my own insecurity or self-consciousness was actually a rational response to years of subtle but consistent messages that my appearance was somehow problematic for my family's carefully curated image. The revelation that would change everything began forming during Emma's bachelorette party weekend in Charleston. I had been invited, of course. Excluding me entirely would have been too obvious and cruel. But even during this celebration of sisterhood and friendship, I found myself observing the dynamics with new clarity. The professional photographer Emma had hired to document the weekend consistently positioned me in ways that minimized my presence in the photos that would later be posted on social media. During one particularly revealing moment, I overheard the photographer asking my mother about the preferred shots for social media posting. My mother's response was carefully coded but unmistakable in its meaning. "Just focus on capturing Emma's happiness with her closest friends," she said, emphasizing the word closest in a way that clearly distinguished between Emma's friends and family members who should be prominently featured and those who should remain in the background. That weekend in Charleston was when I first began to consciously acknowledge what had been happening throughout my life. Surrounded by Emma's college friends who treated me with genuine warmth and inclusion, I realized how different it felt to be in a social situation where my presence was valued rather than merely tolerated. These women who barely knew me were more interested in my thoughts and opinions than my own family had ever been. The contrast was stark and undeniable. Emma's friends asked about my work with genuine curiosity, laughed at my jokes, and included me naturally in conversations and activities. When we took group photos, I wasn't positioned strategically to minimize my impact. I was simply part of the group, valued equally with everyone else. For 3 days I experienced what it felt like to exist in a social space where my worth wasn't determined by how I looked in photographs or whether my presence enhanced or detracted from some impossible standard of perfection. Returning home from Charleston, I found myself looking at my family relationships with new eyes. The patterns that I had always accepted as normal began to seem increasingly problematic. The careful positioning in photos, the selective inclusion in family social media posts, the way conversations about my achievements were quickly redirected to my siblings' more photogenic accomplishments, all of it started to feel like a deliberate campaign to minimize my visibility and importance within my own family. The final piece of clarity came during Thanksgiving dinner last month. As usual, the conversation centered around Emma's upcoming wedding and Jake's football career, with occasional polite inquiries about my work that lasted just long enough to demonstrate interest before shifting back to more engaging topics. But this time, instead of accepting my peripheral role in the family dynamics, I found myself observing the patterns with analytical detachment. I watched as my mother's face lit up when discussing Emma's wedding dress designer and wedding venue, her excitement genuine and infectious. I noticed how she hung on every word when Jake described his prospects for playing professionally in Europe. And I observed the subtle but unmistakable shift in her energy when the conversation briefly turned to my recent promotion to senior environmental consultant, her responses polite but lacking the enthusiasm she showed for my siblings' achievements. The difference wasn't necessarily conscious or malicious. I don't think my mother deliberately set out to make me feel less valued than my siblings. But the cumulative effect of years of subtle preferences and unconscious biases had created a family dynamic where my worth was consistently undervalued and my presence treated as optional rather than essential. The Thanksgiving photos from that evening provided visual confirmation of what I had begun to understand intellectually. Once again, I was included but not featured, present but not prominent, part of the family but somehow separate from its core narrative. The professional photographer my mother had hired captured beautiful images of our family gathering, but the selection that would later appear on social media told a familiar story of selective inclusion and strategic positioning. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by participation trophies and academic awards that had never quite earned the same celebration as Emma's beauty pageant crowns or Jake's athletic achievements, I made a decision that would change everything. I was tired of accepting a supporting role in my own family's story. I was exhausted from pretending that subtle exclusion was normal or acceptable, and I was ready to stop protecting my family's image at the expense of my own dignity and self-worth. The plan that began forming in my mind that Thanksgiving night was both simple and revolutionary. If my family couldn't see my worth, If my mother couldn't appreciate my value beyond my photogenic potential, then I would create a situation that forced them to confront the reality of what they had been doing. I would expose the careful curation and strategic exclusion that had defined my place in the family for as long as I could remember. But I needed to be smart about it. A direct confrontation would likely be dismissed or rationalized away, with my mother claiming I was being oversensitive or misinterpreting innocent family dynamics. Instead, I needed to create undeniable evidence of the patterns I had observed, documentation that would make the truth impossible to ignore or explain away. The opportunity I was waiting for presented itself when my mother called in early December to discuss the family Christmas card photo session. As always, she had hired a professional photographer and coordinated an elaborate setup that would produce the kind of elegant family portrait that would grace the mantels and refrigerators of friends and relatives throughout the holiday season. "Sarah, darling," she said in her sweetest voice, "I know you prefer to stay in the background for these things, so I thought maybe this year you could help with coordination instead of being in all the photos. You know how you feel about cameras, and this way you can ensure everything runs perfectly without any stress." The suggestion was delivered with such apparent thoughtfulness and concern for my comfort that someone who didn't know the history might have interpreted it as genuine kindness. But I recognized it for what it truly was, another attempt to exclude me from the family's public image while making the exclusion seem like my own preference. This time, however, I was ready with a response that would change everything. "Actually, Mom," I said, my voice calm and measured, "I think this year I'd like to be fully included in all the family photos. I've been doing some reflecting lately, and I realize I've been too self-conscious about pictures in the past. I'd really like to be part of our family memories this year." The silence that followed my response lasted several seconds too long, filled with the weight of unspoken assumptions being challenged. When my mother finally spoke, her voice carried a note of uncertainty that I had rarely heard before. "Well, of course, sweetheart, if that's what you really want. I just thought, but if you're sure, I'm absolutely sure," I replied, maintaining the same calm tone. "In fact, I was hoping we could do some individual photos of me as well. You know, the kind you always take of Emma and Jake. I think it would be nice to have some current professional photos for my own use." Another pause, longer this time, filled with the sound of my mother's worldview being quietly rearranged. "Individual photos," she repeated slowly, as if testing how the words sounded. "Yes, I suppose we could arrange for that, if that's something you'd enjoy." The conversation continued for a few more minutes, with my mother attempting to regain her footing while I maintained my pleasant but firm insistence on full inclusion in this year's family photo session. By the time we hung up, I could tell that she was unsettled by my unexpected assertiveness, though she couldn't quite articulate why my request for equal treatment felt so threatening to her carefully managed family image. The photo session was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at our family home, with the photographer arriving at 5 p.m. to take advantage of the golden hour lighting that would make everyone look their most beautiful. I spent the intervening days preparing not just my appearance, but my emotional armor, knowing that the evening would likely reveal truths that had been carefully hidden beneath layers of family politeness and strategic positioning. Thursday afternoon arrived gray and cold, with the kind of December weather that makes indoor lighting essential for photography. I took extra care getting ready, choosing an outfit that I knew looked good on me, and spending time on hair and makeup in a way that I rarely bothered with for family gatherings. If I was going to demand equal treatment, I wanted to look my absolute best while doing it. I arrived at my parents' house at 4:45 p.m., carrying a bottle of wine and a genuine smile that masked the nervous energy thrumming beneath my calm exterior. Emma and Christopher were already there, looking like a magazine cover even in casual pre-photo conversation. Jake had driven down from his apartment in Birmingham, bringing his latest girlfriend, a stunning woman named Sophia who seemed to fit seamlessly into the family's aesthetic preferences. The photographer, a woman named Rebecca, whom my mother had used for several previous family sessions, was setting up her equipment in the living room when I walked in. She greeted me warmly, though I noticed a subtle look of confusion cross her face, as if she wasn't entirely sure why I was there, or how I fit into the evening's plan. "Sarah," my mother exclaimed, her voice carrying just a note of forced enthusiasm. "You look lovely, dear." Rebecca was just explaining how she wants to arrange everyone for the first shots. What happened next would become the moment that changed everything, the confrontation that had been building for 28 years of subtle exclusion and strategic positioning. But it didn't unfold the way I had imagined it would during my weeks of preparation and planning. Instead, as Rebecca began directing family members into various arrangements for the opening shots, I simply stood my ground and insisted on equal inclusion in every photograph. When she suggested that I might be more comfortable in the back row, I politely but firmly requested a front position. When my mother attempted to guide me toward the edge of a group shot, I moved myself to the center. When Rebecca asked if there were any photos that should just feature the core family, I made it clear that I was part of the core family and expected to be included. The evening that followed was a masterclass in passive-aggressive family dynamics, with each photograph becoming a small battle over positioning, inclusion, and visual prominence. My mother's discomfort grew increasingly obvious as the session progressed, her attempts to control the narrative becoming more desperate and transparent with each setup. But the real revelation came during a break between setups, when I excused myself to use the bathroom, and instead positioned myself in the hallway, where I could overhear the conversation happening in the living room. That's when I heard my mother's whispered words to Emma, the confession that would finally give voice to what I had always suspected but never quite believed. "She's not pretty enough for our family photos," my mother said, her voice low but clearly audible. "We can't have her ruining the Christmas card again this year." Those words, spoken with such casual cruelty, crystallized everything I had experienced but never been able to name. In that moment, standing alone in the hallway of my childhood home, I finally understood that the problem had never been my imagination or oversensitivity. The exclusion had been real, deliberate, and based on the most superficial possible assessment of my worth as a human being. The shopping bags slipping from my hands, the sound of groceries scattering across the hardwood floor, the stunned silence that followed, all of it became the prelude to a confrontation that would force my family to face the truth about the dynamics they had created and maintained for almost 3 decades. But what I did next, the action I took in response to my mother's devastating confession, would surprise everyone in that room, and set in motion a chain of events that would transform not just my relationship with my family, but my understanding of my own worth and power in ways I never could have imagined. The silence that followed the crash of groceries hitting the floor seemed to stretch for an eternity. From the living room, I could hear the sudden cessation of conversation, followed by hurried footsteps approaching the hallway. My mother appeared first, her face flushed with what I initially mistook for concern, but quickly recognized as panic. "Sarah, sweetheart, what happened? Are you all right?" Her voice carried that particular tone she used when trying to smooth over potentially uncomfortable situations, bright and cheerful in a way that felt forced and artificial. I stood there among the scattered apples and cans of soup, looking directly into her eyes for what felt like the first time in years. "I heard what you said, Mom, every single word." The color drained from her face so quickly that I thought she might faint. Behind her, Emma appeared in the hallway entrance, her expression shifting from confusion to horror as she realized what had just transpired. Christopher lingered behind her, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding before him. "Sarah, I think there might have been a misunderstanding," my mother began, her voice taking on that placating tone she used when damage control was required. "You know how conversations can sound different when you only hear part of them." I bent down and began collecting the scattered groceries, not because I cared about the mess, but because I needed something to do with my hands while I processed the magnitude of what I had just discovered. Each item I picked up felt symbolic somehow, the bruised apples representing all the times my feelings had been dismissed, the dented cans reflecting the damage done by years of subtle rejection. "There was no misunderstanding," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "You said I'm not pretty enough for family photos. You said I would ruin the Christmas card."
Those were your exact words. Emma stepped forward, her face pale with distress. "Sarah, she didn't mean it the way it sounded. Mom was just stressed about the photographer and trying to make sure everything went smoothly." The immediate rush to defend and rationalize my mother's words was so predictable that I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I stood up slowly, a bag of oranges clutched in my hands, like evidence in a trial I hadn't realized I was already losing. "Actually, Emma, I think she meant it exactly the way it sounded. In fact, I think this is probably the most honest thing anyone in this family has said about me in years." My mother's eyes darted between Emma and me,
calculating her next move with the precision of someone who had spent decades managing family image crises. "Darling, you're upset and you're not thinking clearly. Why don't we sit down and talk about this calmly?" The suggestion that I was somehow overreacting or misinterpreting what I had clearly heard was the final straw. Something inside me that had been carefully contained for 28 years finally broke free. "No, Mom, I'm done sitting down and talking calmly. I'm done pretending that the way you've treated me my entire life is normal or acceptable, and I'm especially done protecting your feelings while you systematically destroy mine." Jake appeared at the end of the hallway, drawn by the sound of raised voices. Sophia stood beside him, her eyes wide with the particular discomfort that comes from witnessing someone else's family crisis. The photographer, Rebecca, had stopped setting up her equipment and was watching our confrontation with professional interest, as if she were documenting a particularly intense family dynamic. "What's going on out here?" Jake asked, his voice carrying the tone of someone who was accustomed to being the peacemaker in family disputes. "What's going on," I said, turning to face my brother directly, "is that I just discovered why I've felt invisible in this family my entire life. It turns out I haven't been imagining things. I really have been systematically excluded from family photos because Mom thinks I'm too ugly to be included." The word ugly hung in the air like a physical presence, impossible to ignore or explain away. Jake's expression shifted from confusion to something that looked like genuine shock, as if he had never consciously noticed the patterns I was describing, but was now seeing them with sudden clarity. "That's not true," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You're always in our family photos." "Am I, Jake? Really? When was the last time you saw a photo of me on Mom's Instagram? When was the last time I was featured prominently in a Christmas card or family portrait? When was the last time anyone in this family treated my achievements with the same enthusiasm they show for yours?" The questions landed like small explosions, each one forcing my family members to confront realities they had either ignored or actively participated in creating. I watched as Jake's face went through a series of expressions, his memory clearly reviewing years of family photos and social media posts with new awareness. My mother, meanwhile, had regrouped enough to launch into full defensive mode. "Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, you are being completely unfair and dramatically overreacting to a private conversation that you had no business overhearing. I have never done anything but love and support you, and I resent the implication that I would deliberately hurt my own daughter." The use of my full name was a power play I remembered from childhood, an attempt to invoke parental authority in a situation where such authority was rapidly dissolving. But I was no longer the insecure child who could be silenced by disappointed looks and guilt trips. "Love and support," I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to maintain control. "Is that what you call positioning me behind other people in every family photo for the past 20 years? Is that what you call suggesting I coordinate Emma's wedding instead of participating as a bridesmaid? Is that what you call having individual photo sessions with Emma and Jake, but never with me?" Each example I cited seemed to hit my family like a physical blow. Emma's face crumpled with what looked like genuine remorse, while Jake stood frozen in apparent shock at the accumulation of evidence I was presenting. Christopher had wisely retreated to the living room, probably texting someone about the family drama he was witnessing. "Those decisions were never about your appearance," my mother insisted, though her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "They were about practical considerations and what would work best for everyone involved." "Practical considerations," I repeated flatly. "Like the practical consideration of not wanting me to ruin your precious family image. Like the practical consideration of maintaining your social media aesthetic. Like the practical consideration of pretending you only have 2 children when it's convenient for your narrative." The photographer, Rebecca, cleared her throat softly. "Perhaps I should reschedule this session for another evening. It seems like your family has some things to work through." "No," I said firmly, surprising everyone including myself. "We're going to have this photo session tonight, exactly as planned, but this time we're going to do it differently." My mother looked at me with growing alarm. "Sarah, you're being completely unreasonable. We can't have professional photos taken when everyone is upset and emotional." "Actually we can, and we will, because for the first time in my life, I'm going to insist on being treated exactly the same as Emma and Jake. I want individual photos, just like they get. I want to be positioned prominently in family photos, just like they are. And I want Rebecca to capture some honest moments instead of the carefully curated perfection you usually demand. The living room fell silent as the implications of my demands sank in. For years, family photo sessions had operated according to unspoken rules about positioning, inclusion, and image management. I was proposing to shatter those rules completely. Emma stepped forward, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Sarah, I had no idea Mom was saying those things about you. I never wanted you to feel excluded or unwanted. You're my sister and I love you. Her words carried genuine emotion, but they also revealed the complexity of the situation we were all navigating. Emma's love for me was real, but so was her unconscious participation in the dynamics that had marginalized me for decades. I know you love me, Emma, but love without awareness isn't enough anymore. Love without advocacy isn't enough anymore. Love that allows harmful patterns to continue unchallenged isn't enough anymore. Jake moved closer, his athletic frame seeming somehow diminished by the weight of the conversation we were having. Sarah, I'm sorry, I honestly never noticed what was happening, but that doesn't make it okay. What can I do to fix this? His question was earnest and well-intentioned, but it also revealed the privilege he had enjoyed as someone who had never had to analyze family photos for evidence of his own worth, or scan social media posts for signs of his inclusion or exclusion. You can start by supporting my right to be treated equally tonight. You can speak up when you see these patterns happening in the future. And you can stop allowing Mom to use your achievements as weapons against mine. My mother, who had been growing increasingly agitated during this exchange, finally exploded with the kind of dramatic emotion she typically reserved for major family crises. This is absolutely ridiculous. I have sacrificed everything for this family, worked tirelessly to create beautiful memories and maintain our reputation in this community, and this is how you repay me. By attacking me in front of a photographer and making wild accusations about favoritism. The performance was impressive, complete with tears and trembling hands, but I had seen it too many times to be moved by it. This was how my mother responded when her control was threatened, not with introspection or accountability, but with emotional manipulation designed to make her critics feel guilty for challenging her behavior. This isn't about your sacrifices, Mom. This is about the fact that you just told Emma I'm too ugly to be in family photos. This is about 28 years of being made to feel like I'm somehow defective because I don't meet your standards of attractiveness. Rebecca, who had been observing our family dynamics with the professional interest of someone who had probably witnessed similar scenes in other homes, spoke up quietly. If I may offer a suggestion, I think it might be helpful for everyone to take a few minutes to collect themselves before we proceed. Family photos work best when everyone feels comfortable and valued. Her diplomatic intervention provided a brief respite from the emotional intensity that had been building in the hallway. But I wasn't ready to let the moment pass without establishing some ground rules for how the evening would proceed. That's fine, I said, my voice calm but firm. But when we start taking photos, I want to be treated exactly the same as everyone else. No strategic positioning to minimize my visibility. No suggestions that I coordinate instead of participating. No selective inclusion based on aesthetic considerations. My mother opened her mouth to object, but I held up my hand to stop her. I'm not finished. I also want Rebecca to take individual photos of me, using the same lighting and poses you use for Emma and Jake. And I want copies of every single photo taken tonight, not just the ones you approve for social media. The demands I was making were simple requests for equal treatment, but they represented a fundamental challenge to the power dynamics that had governed our family relationships for decades. My mother's face cycled through several expressions as she processed the implications of what I was asking for. This is completely unnecessary drama, she said finally. You're making a scene over nothing and embarrassing our family in front of a professional photographer. I'm making a scene over nothing, I repeated incredulously. Mom, you literally just said I'm too ugly to be in family photos. In what universe is that nothing? Emma stepped between us, her wedding dress consultant instincts apparently kicking in as she tried to manage the crisis unfolding in her presence. Maybe we should all just focus on taking some beautiful photos tonight and discuss everything else later, when we've had time to process what happened. Her suggestion was reasonable and well-intentioned, but it also represented exactly the kind of conflict avoidance that had allowed harmful patterns to persist in our family for years.
The impulse to smooth things over and return to normal was strong, but I knew that normal was precisely what needed to change. No, Emma. We're not going to sweep this under the rug and pretend it didn't happen. We're not going to take beautiful photos that maintain the same exclusionary patterns while promising to discuss things later. We're going to address this right now, tonight, by doing things differently. Jake cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontational direction our conversation was taking. Sarah, what exactly do you want from us? How do we fix this? His question was direct and practical, reflecting the problem-solving approach that had made him successful in athletics. But the solution to decades of systemic exclusion wasn't something that could be fixed with a single conversation or photo session. I want acknowledgement that this has been happening, I said, looking directly at each family member in turn. I want genuine apologies, not explanations or justifications. And I want concrete changes in how I'm treated going forward. My mother's expression hardened as she realized that I wasn't going to be satisfied with vague promises or superficial adjustments to our family dynamics. You're asking us to admit to things that simply aren't true. I have never deliberately excluded you from anything, and I resent the implication that I have. The denial was so complete and so contrary to the evidence I had just presented that I felt a moment of genuine disorientation. How could someone deny reality so thoroughly when confronted with specific examples and direct quotes? Mom, I literally just heard you say I'm not pretty enough for family photos. Those were your exact words. How can you possibly deny that you said them? Context matters, Sarah. You heard a fragment of a private conversation and you're assigning meanings and motivations that simply weren't there. The gaslighting was expertly executed, designed to make me question my own perceptions and memories. But I had spent too many years in therapy and too much time analyzing family dynamics to be easily manipulated anymore. The context was a conversation about excluding me from family photos because of my appearance. There's no interpretation of that context that makes your words acceptable. Rebecca cleared her throat again, clearly uncomfortable with the family therapy session that was unfolding in front of her expensive photography equipment. Perhaps we should proceed with the photo session and allow your family to continue this conversation privately afterward. Actually, I said, turning to face the photographer directly, I'd like you to document what happens next. Not just the posed photos, but the real interactions. The way people position themselves naturally, the way my mother directs the arrangements, the way family members respond to suggestions about inclusion or exclusion. My mother's eyes widened with alarm as she realized what I was proposing. Absolutely not. We're not paying a professional photographer to document family conflict. You're paying a professional photographer to document our family. This is what our family looks like right now. This is the reality behind the carefully curated images you've been creating for decades. The power struggle that was playing out in our hallway had moved beyond the specific issue of photo inclusion to encompass broader questions about truth, authenticity, and the right to control family narratives. My mother had built her identity around presenting a perfect family image, and I was threatening to expose the careful construction that made that image possible. Christopher reappeared from the living room, probably hoping that the crisis had resolved itself in his absence. One look at our faces told him that the situation had actually escalated rather than improved. Maybe I should head home and let you all work through this, he suggested diplomatically. No, Emma said quickly. This affects you too, Christopher. You're marrying into this family, and you deserve to know what the dynamics really are. Her words carried an unexpected note of steel that surprised everyone, including herself. Emma had always been the family peacemaker, the one who smoothed over conflicts and maintained harmony at all costs. But something about the evening's revelations seemed to have awakened a new awareness in her. The truth is, Emma continued, her voice growing stronger, I have noticed things over the years. I've seen how Sarah gets positioned in photos and how her achievements get minimized in conversations. I told myself it wasn't intentional or that I was imagining things, but I think I was just avoiding something I didn't want to confront. My mother turned to stare at Emma with a look of profound betrayal, as if her golden child had just sided with the enemy in a war she hadn't realized was being fought. Emma, you're being influenced by your sister's emotional state. This entire conversation is based on misunderstandings and hurt feelings that are being blown completely out of proportion. But Emma shook her head slowly, her engagement ring catching the hallway light as she gestured. No, Mom.
I don't think it is. I think Sarah is right about a lot of things, and I think I've been complicit in maintaining patterns that hurt her. The alignment between Emma and me was unexpected and powerful, shifting the dynamic in the hallway in ways that clearly alarmed my mother. For the first time in the conversation, she seemed to realize that her carefully constructed narrative was crumbling beyond her ability to repair. Jake, meanwhile, had been unusually quiet during the escalating confrontation. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of someone who was processing years of observations he had never fully acknowledged. "I remember when that magazine did the feature on our family," he said slowly. "Sarah was barely in any of the photos, and when I asked about it, Mom said the photographer had focused on athletic and academic achievements. But Sarah had academic achievements too, she just wasn't featured the same way." The memory he was citing was one I had tried to forget, but hearing him acknowledge it felt like a small victory in itself. These weren't imaginary slights or oversensitive interpretations, they were real patterns that other family members had noticed but chosen not to examine too closely. "That's exactly what I'm talking about," I said, feeling validation flood through me. "These patterns have been happening for years, but they've been so subtle and so normalized that everyone just accepted them as natural family dynamics." My mother was beginning to look cornered, her usual confidence replaced by something that looked almost like panic. The careful construction of family harmony that she had maintained for decades was unraveling in real time, and she seemed to have no strategy for dealing with the crisis. "This is all completely unfair," she said, her voice taking on a plaintive quality that I hadn't heard before. "I've done my best as a mother, and now you're all ganging up on me and making me out to be some kind of monster." The shift to victimhood was predictable but still effective, triggering the protective instincts that had been carefully cultivated in all of us over the years. I could see Emma and Jake wavering, their newfound awareness competing with their ingrained need to protect our mother from perceived attacks. "Nobody's calling you a monster, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "But we are calling you accountable for patterns of behavior that have been harmful to me for decades." "Harmful," she repeated, her voice rising. "Everything I've done has been in your best interest. Every decision I've made has been designed to protect you and help you succeed." The reframing was masterful, transforming exclusion into protection and marginalization into maternal care. But I was no longer willing to accept explanations that required me to deny my own experiences and observations. Protecting me from what, exactly? Being visible in family photos. Being celebrated for my achievements. Being treated as an equal member of this family. The questions hung in the air without answers, highlighting the logical contradictions in my mother's defensive narrative. Rebecca had given up any pretense of preparing for the photo session and was now openly watching our family confrontation with the fascination of someone witnessing a dramatic performance. Emma stepped forward again, her voice carrying new resolve. "Mom, I think what Sarah is asking for is really simple. She wants to be treated the same way Jake and I are treated. She wants to be included equally in family photos and celebrations. That doesn't seem unreasonable to me." The support from Emma was unexpected and deeply meaningful, representing a shift in family alliances that had the potential to change everything. But it also escalated the stakes of our confrontation, making it clear that this wasn't just about photo positioning, but about fundamental questions of fairness and respect within our family. My mother looked between Emma and me with an expression I had never seen before, something that combined hurt, anger, and what might have been genuine confusion. For a moment I wondered if she was finally beginning to understand the impact of her behavior, or if she was simply calculating her next move in what had become a high-stakes emotional chess game. "Fine," she said finally, her voice carrying a note of resigned defeat. "If you want to be in every single photo, if you want individual portraits, if you want to be treated exactly the same as your siblings, then that's what we'll do. But don't blame me if the results aren't what you hoped for." The concession felt hollow, delivered with the kind of grudging compliance that suggested she was giving in to unreasonable demands rather than acknowledging legitimate concerns. But it was also the first time in my life that I had successfully challenged her authority and won. "Thank you," I said simply, not trusting myself to say more without triggering another round of conflict. Rebecca cleared her throat one final time. "Shall we begin with some individual portraits then? Sarah, would you like to go first?" The question represented a small revolution in our family's photo session protocol. Never before had I been offered the first position, the prime lighting, the focused attention of a professional photographer. As I followed Rebecca into the living room, I could hear my mother whispering urgently to Emma behind me, but I couldn't make out the words. What I was about to discover during that photo session would reveal truths about my family that went far deeper than strategic positioning and aesthetic preferences. The camera, as it turned out, would capture not just images but the fundamental dynamics that had shaped my entire life. And the photos we took that evening would become evidence in a case I was building not just against my mother's behavior, but for my own worth and dignity as a human being. Standing in front of Rebecca's camera for my individual portrait session felt like stepping into an alternate universe, where I was the star of my own story, rather than a supporting character in someone else's narrative. The professional lighting transformed our familiar living room into something that felt theatrical and important, casting warm golden tones across the space where I had spent countless childhood hours feeling invisible. "Let's start with some natural poses," Rebecca suggested, adjusting her camera settings with practiced efficiency. "Just relax and be yourself. Think about something that makes you genuinely happy." The instruction was simple, but executing it proved surprisingly difficult. After decades of being positioned strategically to minimize my presence in photos, the concept of being the sole focus of professional attention felt foreign and overwhelming. I found myself automatically angling my body to take up less space, tilting my head to hide what I perceived as unflattering angles, adopting the defensive postures that had become second nature over years of photographic marginalization. "Sarah," Rebecca said gently, lowering her camera, "you're tensing up. Try to shake out your shoulders and take a deep breath. Remember, this is your moment. There's nobody else to worry about in these shots." Her words hit me with unexpected force. This was my moment. For the first time in my adult life, I was the center of attention in a family photo context, and nobody could position me strategically or suggest that I coordinate instead of participating. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. From the kitchen, I could hear my mother's voice engaged in what sounded like damage control conversations with Emma and Jake. The words were muffled, but the tone carried the urgent quality of someone trying to regain control of a narrative that had spiraled beyond her management. Occasionally, I caught fragments of phrases like "completely overreacting" and "always been sensitive about photos," which confirmed that she was still operating from a defensive position rather than genuine reflection. "That's much better," Rebecca said as I began to relax into the poses. "You have beautiful eyes. Let's get some shots that really highlight them." The compliment felt strange coming from someone who wasn't obligated to say nice things about my appearance. Rebecca was a professional who worked with attractive people regularly, and her positive assessment of my features carried weight that family compliments never had. As she continued shooting, offering gentle direction and genuine praise, I began to understand what it felt like to be seen and valued for who I was rather than evaluated for how well I fit into someone else's aesthetic vision. 20 minutes into my individual session, something shifted. The defensive postures melted away, replaced by a confidence I hadn't realized I possessed. Rebecca captured smile after smile that felt genuine rather than forced, expressions of joy that emerged from finally being the priority rather than the afterthought. When she showed me some of the images on her camera's preview screen, I barely recognized the radiant woman looking back at me. "These are gorgeous," Rebecca said with professional satisfaction. "You photograph beautifully. I'm surprised your family hasn't done individual portraits of you before." Her observation was innocuous, probably meant as casual conversation, but it highlighted the very issue that had brought us to this confrontation. My family hadn't done individual portraits of me because my mother had never considered me worthy of that kind of focused attention and investment. "Actually," I said, feeling empowered by the success of my portrait session, "this is the first time anyone has ever taken professional photos of just me. My siblings have individual portraits regularly, but it never occurred to anyone that I might want them too." Rebecca's expression shifted from casual friendliness to something that looked like understanding mixed with sympathy. As someone who documented families professionally, she had probably observed similar dynamics in other homes, though perhaps not articulated so explicitly. "Well, we're certainly making up for lost time tonight," she said diplomatically. "Should we bring in the rest of your family for group shots now?" The transition from my individual session to family group photos felt like stepping back into familiar territory, except this time I was armed with new confidence and explicit agreements about my inclusion. When my mother, Emma, Jake, Christopher, and Sophia gathered in the living room, the atmosphere carried tension that was barely concealed beneath polite family photo smiles. "Let's start with immediate family," Rebecca suggested, "and then we can add partners and do some extended group shots." My mother immediately began her usual routine of positioning family members according to her aesthetic preferences, but this time I was ready for her attempts at strategic placement. When she suggested I stand behind my father where the lighting would be more flattering, I politely but firmly moved myself to a more prominent position. When she recommended that Jake and I switch places so the height differential would be more balanced, I declined and remained where I was. Each small act of resistance felt like a victory, not because I was being difficult or confrontational, but because I was finally advocating for my right to equal treatment. Rebecca seemed to notice the subtle power struggles happening during her directing process, but she maintained professional neutrality while accommodating my requests for prominent positioning. The family photos that resulted from this session were unlike any we had ever taken before. For the first time in decades, I was positioned equally with my siblings, my face clearly visible and well lit, my presence treated as essential rather than optional. When Rebecca showed us the preview images, the difference was striking. These photos told the story of a family with 3 children who were all valued equally, rather than the carefully curated narrative of selective inclusion that had characterized our previous family portraits. My mother's reaction to seeing these images was telling. Her smile became increasingly strained as she reviewed photos where I was prominently featured, and she began making comments about how certain arrangements might be too busy or how some poses didn't feel quite right. But Emma and Jake responded enthusiastically to the images, commenting on how natural and happy everyone looked. "These are amazing," Emma said, genuinely excited as she scrolled through Rebecca's camera preview. "We all look so relaxed and genuine. Sarah, you look absolutely radiant." The praise from my sister felt different this time, offered in the context of photos where I was actually visible and valued rather than tucked away in background positions. For the first time, I was receiving compliments on family photos where I was an equal participant rather than a reluctant inclusion. As the evening progressed, we took dozens of photos in various configurations and poses. Rebecca was thorough and professional, capturing both formal portraits and candid moments that revealed the real dynamics between family members. In some shots, the residual tension from our earlier confrontation was visible, but in others, genuine affection and connection shone through despite the difficult conversations we had navigated. The most significant moment came when Rebecca suggested taking a photo of just the 3 siblings together. This type of shot had been a regular feature of our family photography sessions, but I had always been positioned in ways that minimized my visual impact. This time, when my mother began to offer positioning suggestions, Emma spoke up. "Actually, Mom, I think Sarah should be in the middle this time. She's been relegated to the sides in sibling photos for years." The suggestion was simple but revolutionary, representing a fundamental shift in how family photo arrangements would be determined. My mother's face went through several expressions as she processed Emma's assertion of different priorities, but she ultimately remained silent as I moved to the center position between my siblings. The photos Rebecca captured of the 3 of us together were some of the most beautiful family images I had ever been part of. We looked like equals, like siblings who genuinely cared about each other, like a family unit where everyone belonged equally. When I saw those images, I felt a sense of belonging that had been missing from family photos my entire life. As the photo session wound down, my mother's behavior became increasingly erratic. She oscillated between trying to regain control of the narrative and withdrawing into hurt silence. When Rebecca began packing up her equipment, my mother made one final attempt to manage the situation. "Rebecca, when you edit these photos, please make sure to send us the ones that work best for our Christmas cards and social media. You know the kind of images we typically use." The request was coded but clear. She wanted Rebecca to revert to the selective editing and curating that had characterized our family photo sharing for years. But I was no longer willing to accept that level of editorial control over my inclusion in family memories. "Actually, Rebecca, I'd like to receive all the photos from tonight's session. Every single image, not just the ones that meet certain aesthetic standards. My mother's eyes flashed with irritation, but Rebecca nodded professionally. Of course, I'll provide you with a complete gallery of all the shots from this evening. After Rebecca left, our family sat in the living room surrounded by the aftermath of what had been both a photo session and a reckoning. The atmosphere was heavy with the weight of revelations and confrontations that couldn't be undone or forgotten. My mother sat in her usual chair, looking smaller somehow, as if the evening's events had diminished her in ways that went beyond the immediate conflict. I think we need to talk about what happens next, I said, breaking the silence that had settled over us. Tonight was about more than just photos, it was about patterns of treatment that have been happening for years. Emma nodded slowly, her engagement ring catching the light as she twisted it nervously around her finger. Sarah's right. I've been thinking about everything she said earlier, and I can see examples of what she's talking about going back to when we were kids. Jake shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly struggling with the realization that he had been an unconscious beneficiary of family dynamics that had marginalized his sister. What can we do to fix this? How do we make sure it doesn't happen again? Their willingness to acknowledge the problems and work toward solutions felt like a victory, but I knew that real change would require more than good intentions and temporary awareness. Decades of ingrained patterns don't disappear overnight, and my mother's defensive responses throughout the evening suggested that she wasn't ready to accept full responsibility for her behavior. I think we need to establish some clear agreements about how I'm treated going forward, I said carefully. Equal inclusion in family photos and social media posts. Equal celebration of my achievements and milestones. Equal consideration when family decisions are being made. My mother finally spoke, her voice carrying a note of resignation that I had never heard before. Sarah, I never intended to make you feel excluded or undervalued. If my choices about photos and family presentations hurt you, then I'm sorry. But I also think you need to understand that everything I've done has been with the best intentions. The apology was partial and defensive, more focused on justifying her intentions than acknowledging the impact of her actions. But it was also the closest thing to accountability I had ever received from her, and I decided to accept it as a starting point rather than demanding perfect contrition. I appreciate that, Mom, but going forward, I need you to consider the impact of your decisions, not just your intentions. I need you to include me equally in family photos and celebrations, even if that doesn't match your aesthetic preferences. The conversation that followed was difficult and sometimes uncomfortable, but it was also more honest than any family discussion we had ever had. We talked about specific examples of exclusionary behavior, the cumulative impact of subtle marginalization, and concrete steps for creating more equitable family dynamics. My mother participated reluctantly, clearly struggling with the idea that her carefully curated family image had been harmful to one of her children. Emma emerged as an unexpected ally, offering specific examples of changes she wanted to make in how family events were planned and documented. Jake, while less articulate about the dynamics we were discussing, committed to being more aware of inclusion and exclusion patterns in future family interactions. 3 weeks later, when Rebecca delivered the completed photos from our session, the images told a story of transformation that went beyond aesthetic improvements. The individual portraits of me were stunning, capturing a confidence and radiance that I had never seen in previous photos of myself. The family group shots showed us as equals for the first time in decades, with no one positioned as more or less important than anyone else. My mother's reaction to the final photos was mixed. She praised the technical quality and professional composition, but I could see her struggling with images that didn't conform to her usual standards of family presentation. When it came time to select photos for the Christmas card, she attempted to revert to her old patterns of selective inclusion, but Emma and Jake supported my insistence on equal representation. The Christmas card we sent that year featured a beautiful family portrait where all 5 of us were prominently and equally displayed. When friends and colleagues commented on how lovely the photos were, several people specifically mentioned how radiant and confident I looked, observations that would have been impossible in previous years, when I was strategically minimized or excluded. The changes in our family dynamics weren't immediate or complete, but they were real and measurable. My mother began including me more prominently in social media posts, though I could tell it required conscious effort on her part. Emma made sure I was equally involved in wedding planning decisions, and Jake started asking about my work and achievements with genuine interest rather than polite obligation. More importantly, I discovered something about myself during that confrontational evening that changed how I approached all my relationships. I learned that I had the right to advocate for equal treatment, the power to challenge harmful patterns, and the strength to demand better without accepting guilt or manipulation in response. 6 months after our photo session confrontation, Emma's wedding took place as planned. This time, when my mother attempted to suggest that I coordinate rather than participate as a bridesmaid, Emma immediately shut down the suggestion and insisted on my full inclusion. The wedding photos captured a day of genuine celebration where I was treated as an essential part of the family story rather than an optional addition. The individual portrait Rebecca had taken of me that evening became my professional headshot, leading to opportunities and connections I might never have pursued if I had continued accepting my family's assessment of my photogenic potential. More importantly, it served as a daily reminder of what I looked like when I was valued and celebrated rather than hidden and minimized. Looking back on that transformative evening, I realized that my mother's whispered words about my appearance were actually a gift, though not the kind she intended to give.